Christmas Eve, 1932. Snow blanketed the world outside, muffling every sound, save for the occasional crackle of the fireplace. My parents had left hours earlier, braving the cold for a gathering in the next village. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat by the window, watching the snow drift lazily in the faint moonlight. The silence was comforting at first, but as the hours dragged on, it became oppressive. Shadows from the flickering fire danced on the walls, and I found myself starting at every creak of the old house. Yet, none of this prepared me for the sound that broke through the stillness, a faint jingle of bells. I froze, straining to hear. It came again, distant yet distinct, carried on the icy wind. The sound shouldn't have reached this far. No one ventured out on nights like this. My curiosity swelled, overriding the unease prickling at the back of my neck. I moved to the window and rubbed a clear patch on the frost-covered glass. What I saw made my breath hitch. Outside, where the snow should have been untouched, stood a sleigh unlike any I had ever seen. It shimmered faintly, as if carved from moonlight, with horses as pale as death standing eerily still. Their breath misted in the cold, though it dissipated far too quickly, as if the air refused to hold on to it. But it was the driver that held my attention, a tall, shadowed figure seated at the reins. His form was indistinct, as though cloaked in darkness itself. He didn't move, yet I felt his gaze fix on me through the glass, sharp and unrelenting. My heart hammered as he raised a gloved hand and beckoned. I should have stayed inside. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt the door and hide beneath my blankets. But something deeper, primal, stirred within me, a pull I couldn't resist. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I opened the door and stepped into the night. The cold bit sharply at my skin, but I barely noticed. The figure didn't move as I approached, though the horses' heads turned slightly, their hollow black eyes tracking me. The sleigh was silent, no creak of wood, no crunch of snow beneath its runners. I hesitated as I reached it, my breath visible in trembling puffs. "You called for me," I whispered, not knowing why I spoke. The driver gestured again, his shadowy form melding with the night. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the sleigh, my hands trembling as I gripped the icy rail. The seat was cold, the chill seeping through my coat and numbing my skin. The figure flicked the reins and the sleigh jerked forward, gliding noiselessly into the night. The first stretch of the journey was almost magical. The sleigh cut through the snow effortlessly, the stars above twinkling like scattered diamonds. The horses moved in perfect unison, their hooves never faltering. But the beauty was deceptive, fragile as a snowflake seconds before it melts. I began to notice subtle changes. The air grew heavier, colder, as if I were being swallowed by the night itself. The once glittering snow turned dull, its surface marred by strange, winding patterns like claw marks etched deep into the earth. The stars above dimmed, their light fading as if something vast and unseen loomed between them and me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice breaking the unnatural silence. The driver didn't respond. His gloved hands tightened on the reins, the only indication he'd heard me. I shifted uncomfortably, the chill now unbearable. My breath came faster, clouds of it swirling in the air. That was when I heard it, the whispers. They were faint at first, indistinct murmurs that rose and fell like the wind. But as the sleigh moved deeper into the shadowed landscape, they grew louder, their words still unintelligible but heavy with intent. The sound seemed to seep into my very bones, setting my nerves on edge. Shapes began to emerge from the darkness. At first I thought they were trees, their twisted forms looming over the sleigh like skeletal sentinels. But as we passed, I saw them shift and shudder, their outlines flickering unnaturally. They weren't trees. They were watching me. I clenched my hands into fists, nails biting into my palms. My breath hitched as I caught glimpses of pale faces between the shadows, their eyes hollow and accusing. They seemed to reach for the sleigh as it passed, their movements slow and deliberate. "Stop!" I shouted, panic surging. "Let me out!" The driver turned his head slightly, and for the first time I saw him clearly, or what passed for him. His face was a void, a swirling mass of shadow that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. "You agreed," he said, his voice low and resonant, a sound that vibrated in my chest. "I didn't agree to this," I cried, gripping the sides of the sleigh. But the horses sped up, their translucent bodies blurring as the landscape grew darker, stranger. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to stop the sound. And then, ahead of us, the trees, or figures, parted, revealing a frozen lake. Its surface gleamed like black glass, reflecting no light. The sleigh slowed, its runners barely skimming the ice. I felt a new kind of dread settle over me, heavy and suffocating. Whatever awaited on that lake was worse than anything I'd seen so far. Yet the driver pressed onward, his shadowed form unyielding. My fingers itched toward the lantern hanging beside him. It was the only thing in this unnatural world that felt real, its light warm and alive. Desperation flared in my chest. Whatever it was for, it was my only chance. The sleigh came to a halt, and the driver turned to face me fully. His shadowed face split into what I can only describe as a smile. The sleigh creaked to a stop at the edge of the frozen lake, its runners unnaturally steady on the glassy surface. The world around us was utterly still, the kind of silence that burrows into your mind and makes every thought feel louder than a shout. I dared not breathe too deeply, for fear it would shatter the fragile quiet. The whispers were gone now, replaced by something far worse, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from the lake itself. It vibrated in the air, in my chest, like the mournful toll of a distant bell. The driver turned to face me fully, his shadowed form towering and suffocating. I couldn't look away from where his face should have been, an endless void that seemed to pull at the edges of my sanity. "You've been chosen," he said, the words crawling through the air like insects, their weight pressing down on me. "Chosen for what?" My voice was hoarse, my throat dry as desert sand. He did not answer. Instead, he gestured toward the lake. The ice shimmered faintly, and I saw something moving beneath it. A shape, dark and massive, writhing just beneath the surface. My stomach churned as a terrible understanding dawned. Whatever was under the ice was waiting for me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not going out there." The driver didn't speak again, but the horses stamped their ghostly hooves, the sound sharp and jarring. The sleigh shifted, the motion pulling me toward the edge of the seat. I clung to the rail, my knuckles white with the effort, but the sleigh seemed to have a will of its own. I glanced at the lantern hanging beside the driver. Its flickering light was the only source of warmth in the icy void, a small beacon of hope. Without thinking, I lunged for it. The driver's hand shot out, his gloved fingers closing around my wrist with a grip like iron. The cold was searing, an icy burn that made me cry out. "You agreed," he said again, his voice a cold, unyielding judgment. "I didn't know!" I screamed, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I didn't know what I was agreeing to." His grip tightened, the pain unbearable. My vision blurred, the world tilting dangerously. But just as I felt myself slipping, I twisted my body, using all my weight to yank the lantern free. The handle snapped, and I fell back into the sleigh, clutching it to my chest. The driver recoiled slightly, his shadow flickering like a flame in the wind. The horses reared, their movements wild and erratic, and for a moment, the air was filled with the sound of their frantic neighing. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. The lantern's light was weak, flickering like it might go out at any second, but it was enough to push back the shadows that seemed to encroach on all sides. "Stay back," I warned, though my voice was shaking. The driver regarded me for a long moment before he spoke again. "You cannot escape what you've begun." The sleigh lurched violently, nearly toppling as the horses bolted forward, dragging us onto the frozen lake. The ice groaned beneath the runners, the sound sharp and ominous, but the sleigh moved as if weightless. My panic grew with every second as the dark shape beneath the ice followed us, pacing like a predator stalking its prey. The lantern in my hands flared suddenly, its light stronger now, and for the first time I saw the driver falter. His shadow rippled unnaturally, as though the light were peeling away layers of his form. Hope kindled in my chest, but it was fragile, like the flame I now carried. I looked down at the lake, the creature below moving closer, its presence a suffocating weight. The hum grew louder, a deep, bone-rattling vibration that made me feel as though my very being was unraveling. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't meant for this world, or for me. Desperation gave me clarity. The driver, the sleigh, the lake, everything about this was connected. If I could break the connection, perhaps I could end this nightmare. I gripped the lantern tightly and turned to face the driver. His shadowed form loomed larger, as if he sensed my intent. "You will submit," he hissed, his voice splintering into a dozen overlapping tones. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not tonight." With a cry, I swung the lantern, shattering its glass casing against the rail of the sleigh. Flames erupted, unnaturally bright, the light cutting through the darkness like a blade. The driver let out a terrible sound, not a scream, but something deeper, a guttural roar that vibrated through my bones. The sleigh buckled violently as the fire spread, consuming the wood and licking at the reins. The horses dissolved into plumes of mist, their forms scattering into the night. The lake cracked beneath us, jagged lines spreading outward as the ice began to give way. I leapt from the sleigh just as it was swallowed by the black waters below. The driver's form collapsed into shadow, his screams echoing as he was dragged into the abyss. The fire burned brighter for a moment before vanishing entirely, leaving nothing but silence. I landed hard on the snow, my body trembling from the cold and the terror. When I looked back, the lake was calm again, its surface unbroken and serene. The sleigh, the driver, and the creature were gone, as if they'd never existed. But the lantern's broken handle was still in my hand, its metal warm despite the icy air. The world was still, yet the silence was not comforting. It was suffocating. I lay in the snow, my breath coming in ragged, frosty gasps. The lantern's broken handle dug into my palm, the only tangible proof of the nightmare I'd just endured. My heart raced, my body trembling not just from the cold, but from the memory of what had just transpired. I forced myself to sit up, my movements stiff and clumsy. The lake lay before me, its surface a mirror of black glass. The sleigh was gone, swallowed whole, yet the air around it still felt wrong, tainted. A faint vibration lingered just beneath the threshold of hearing, like the hum of something alive and restless. I turned away from the lake, desperate to distance myself from its pull. But as I trudged through the snow, the forest loomed darker, the trees more menacing. The shadows between them seemed to shift, stretching and curling like fingers reaching for me. My legs burned with the effort of moving, but the further I went, the more I felt something was following me. At first it was just a feeling, a prickling at the nape of my neck. Then came the whispers, faint and fragmented, their words like a language I could almost understand, but dared not try to. I stumbled, falling to my knees, my head snapping toward the sound. The pale figures I'd seen earlier in the journey now stood at the edge of the woods, half hidden by the trees. Their faces were still ashen and hollow, their eyes bottomless voids. They didn't move but watched intently, their heads tilting in unison as though studying me. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Stay away." But they didn't retreat. Instead, they grew clearer, more distinct, their forms solidifying with every second. The realization hit me like a blow. The driver may have been banished, but whatever he served, whatever had called to me through him, was not done with me. The whispers grew louder, the figures closer. With a surge of adrenaline, I forced myself to my feet and ran, clutching the broken handle as though it were a lifeline. The forest blurred around me, the world narrowing to the sound of my pounding footsteps and the relentless whispers that seemed to follow. When I finally saw the light of my house ahead, tears sprang to my eyes. But even as I reached the door and slammed it shut behind me, I knew I hadn't escaped. The air inside felt colder, heavier, as though something unseen had entered with me. And then, from the shadows of the room, I heard it again, the faint, mocking jingle of bells.